So I think we can get started and people can always step back in because I just wanted to say a couple words about our speaker tonight. First of all, thank you everyone for logging on tonight to another program in our continuing sustainability series here at the Ridgewood Library. Tonight we have Lourdes Osorio, who has spoken to us before about trying to keep deer from eating everything in our gardens, which I've been trying to do myself. I think that everybody has that same feeling. Lourdes has been a Passaic County Master Gardener, and that's Master Gardener with a capital M and G, since I think 1996. And that means she's kind of like a gardener's gardener. And like the best gardeners, she likes to share her expertise and knowledge with new gardeners, expert gardeners, and people who might not even know that they're going to be gardeners after they talk to Lourdes. She created the Native Plant channel, which you can find on YouTube, and there's also a Facebook page. She writes on issues affecting native New Jersey landscapes, like loss of habitat and invasives in deer and similar issues. She writes for Master Gardeners of Bergen County, Master Gardeners of Passaic County, and the Laurelwood Arboretum of Wayne, which is kind of like a hidden treasure in New Jersey, where she's a board member of the Friends Group, which runs the Arboretum. Tonight, she's going to talk with us about creating an eco-friendly garden. And I think we'll find out that it's more than planting just the right kinds of plants, though, of course, that's important. But I'm sure there are a lot of other things that we can do just to help keep our gardens as ecological as possible. So, thank you very much. I'll step aside. Thank you, Lourdes.
Okay, thank you. And let me share my screen with you. And hopefully we won't have any technology issues, right? So this presentation is from buzz to chirps and flashes, creating an eco-friendly garden. Because I want to thank everyone for tuning into this topic, which is really just so important these days, that we do our best to create more eco-friendly habitat for our wildlife. And so there are many ways to garden. Let's take a look. This is one way. This is one garden that was photographed in Massachusetts, where all the flowers are plastic. Okay. And so here's one way to garden, right? And think about it. Provides color year round, even in the snow, even in the winter, provides color year round. You don't have to worry about deadheading, everything's always in bloom, right? But why don't we want a garden like this? For us, this doesn't hold an attraction. And that's because something like this is missing the buzz, and it's missing chirps, and it's missing flashes. It is not providing a habitat where the many insects and birds and butterflies and so many things that we enjoy seeing can live. Because why have something like that when you can have something like this with all these beautiful eastern tiger swallowtails, for example, in the midst, right? And you can't get that with those plastic or silk flowers. And yet, some of the plants that we use in our gardens really are the equivalent of those plastic flowers, because they do not provide food for our wildlife. Some of the topics we're going to talk about today is what's proper maintenance for an eco-friendly garden, creating habitat for butterflies, bees, fireflies, and other insects, and then native plants for your garden that help create habitat for these insects and birds, okay? One thing you want to do regarding maintenance, and right now, especially since it's fall, usually in the fall, people start cleaning up their leaves, put them in a bag, put them on put them out for pickup. Leave your leaves. There's all kinds of issues, that people have, oh, they're going to kill my lawn. Unless there's an extremely thick layer on your lawn, they're really not going to damage the lawn. Some people feel that plants can't grow through the leaves. Plants have been growing through leaves for eons before humans decided that the leaves needed to be removed. So they provide habitat, they provide camouflage, as you can see with this lovely butterfly that's hiding amongst the leaves. And they help retain moisture for the life that's living and hiding in them. Okay. And then regarding camouflage, remember there's greens, there's browns, and you can see the katydid hiding here. So be on the lookout for what's hiding in your garden. It's very fascinating to go out there and see all kinds of life, such as this. If you look inside the black circle in the middle of the screen, and you're going to see a camouflaged looper, which is a type of caterpillar. And what they do is they cover themselves with pieces of material from plants, like petals from this feverfew. And they basically camouflage themselves by just attaching these pieces from the garden, pieces of petals and plant material to themselves. And it's just pretty fascinating. I was noticing the feverfew one day, and then I'm like, wait a minute, that's what's in the center of that flower. That's not, that's not part of the plant. So insects can hide so well. Here's an example of another one doing the same thing on yarrow, or two more doing the same thing on yarrow, how well they blend in. And another thing without maintenance is usually in the fall, or depending on how neat you are, people set out and remove any stems that are standing, the dead material from the plants. Really, you should try and leave stems standing for quite some time throughout the winter. They provide cover for nesting bees, especially plants with hollow stems, such as caneberries, raspberries, etc., sunflowers. You should try and leave, even in the spring. You really should try not to clean up until the weather gets to be about 50 degrees. And that way, a large number of the insects have had time to complete their life cycles and emerge from places that they are hiding. And it would be great if you could leave the stems 8 to 24 inches high. As the green growth grows around them, they'll be covered up and they won't be noticeable. Another important item that you need to leave is things like stumps, logs, and wood piles, because all kinds of life is hiding in them. And you'll notice that if you pick up any type of log or some type of branch from a tree, you're normally going to find something hiding under it. And we have to realize that about 70% of bees nest in the ground, and they need bare soil. So if you can reduce the amount of mulch that you use in some areas, because we all know, we will often need mulch in order to suppress weeds and in order to retain soil moisture. But if there's an area where you can leave the ground bare, that would help our bees. And create a brush pile. If you don't like having, for example, the leaves on your lawn, or if you'd like to remove some of the stems, then keep them all. Create a brush pile somewhere on your property where you don't find it, where it's less visible, so that whatever is hiding and living in the leaves and the stems can still complete its life cycle. Okay, and use native plants. Native plants are part of the food web that provides life. So strive for native plants that feed caterpillars. They are a huge source of food for other living things, especially birds. And the king, if you have room on your property, the king for feeding caterpillars are oak trees. So if you have room, and there are some smaller oaks, Can do some research on what some of the smaller oaks are. But oaks host or feed over 500 species of Lepidoptera, meaning butterflies, moths, and skippers. So they are a key tree. So if you're considering taking one down, think again. Try and leave oaks on your property. Okay. And then let's talk about omnivores versus species specific, right? So we're omnivores. We eat anything really that's put in front of us, most of us, unless, for people who might be vegan or vegetarian. But most of the population eats plants, they eat animals, right? But it doesn't work that way with insects. Most insects are species specific for some part of their life cycle, meaning that at one point in their life cycle, they can only survive based on a specific host plant. And most people are familiar with the example of the monarch butterfly that you see here and the milkweed. The adult monarch butterfly can take nectar from pretty much any flower that produces nectar. So the adult is not the problem. The problem is that it can never get to be an adult because if you don't have milkweeds for their caterpillars, because the caterpillars will only eat plants in the milkweed family. And this is a very common thing with insects, that at some point in their life cycle, they need a certain plant. And without that plant, they cannot continue their life cycle. Okay. And these food webs are very connected and complex. Take one item out, and you have just doomed an insect that needed that item. For example, Woodland Phlox, which is, if you look at the photo on the left, the bluish plant, a low growing, nice ground cover in shade, the bluish plant needs pollination by the Snowberry clearwing moth, which is this insect flying here in the middle. And it is a day flying moth. Sometimes people see these in their garden and they think that they're hummingbirds. They fly in a way that makes them resemble hummingbirds, and they're somewhat similar, but they're not. They are actually a day flying moth. And you can tell they're not a bird because of the antennae. So look for that, and then you'll know it's not a bird. So the phlox is only pollinated by the clearwing moth in order to produce seed. And in turn, this moth needs coral honeysuckle, the vine that's on the right side of your screen, as its host plant. Its caterpillar basically needs the coral honeysuckle in order to complete its life cycle. So you're seeing ways that different organisms are interconnected and need each other. And the loss of one interferes with the others. Okay. And another example is that native bees, many of them can only reproduce on the pollen of a specific plant genus. For example, the Phacelia bee can only reproduce with pollen from the Phacelia, which is the blue plant on the right. And according to Doug Tallamy, who is an expert on native plants and on ecosystems, some of you may have heard him speak, there are at least 13 species of native bees that live on the pollen of native perennial sunflowers. Okay. And again, native plants, we need to use them because it's all about food webs. Larger organisms, that you say eat smaller ones, larger organisms eat smaller organisms. And plants are the only organisms that can capture the sun's energy and turn it into food. This food feeds other living organisms, including us. And the way that we're currently using our land is not sustainable. Now I'm going to get to probably the closest that we can come to real magic, right? For those of you who enjoy fireflies or lightning bugs, just fascinating creatures. Once July comes, it is just a fabulous time of the year. This photo was taken from the Hubble telescope. What I'd like you to notice, and I know it might be difficult on a screen, is that there's different colors of light. And that's because there are many species of fireflies. We tend to think of them as just one, but there are a number of species. And one way that they differentiate each other is through the color of their light. You're going to see some that are more yellow, some are more orange, there are some that are green. So they do produce different colors. And only fireflies east of the Rocky Mountains light up. So we are fortunate that we live east of the Rockies and can actually witness this phenomenon. There are 2,000 species of fireflies worldwide, and the mid-Atlantic states have about 12. So just in our area, there are a dozen that we can see. And generally, it is the males that fly around, and they're looking for females who tend to be on the ground. So next July, notice that you're going to see some flashes coming from ground level, and that those aren't moving. Those would be the females. The males are in general the ones who are flying around looking for the females. And again, they have different flashing patterns, and meaning the time interval in between the lighting. And the colors of the light are different: yellows, greens, oranges. That's how they find each other and find the right species. Adults live from a few days to about 2 weeks. Some don't even feed. So when we are witnessing this, what you are witnessing is the end of their life cycle. And pretty much the individual firefly will only be alive for about 2 weeks, okay, as in the adult stage. Remember, they are insects, so they have various life stages. Most of their life stage is spent at ground level or underground as larvae, as something similar to what is pictured here. This is one species. And at this time, they're known as glowworms because they will glow underground. In order to help preserve them and not kill them, remembering that 2 years of their life is spent ground level or below, you have to avoid disturbing the soil. Mow less frequently and mow high as adults hide in grasses. Again, leave the leaves. Don't use pesticides. Don't use chemical fertilizers. These all interfere with their lives. And turn off outdoor lights. A key thing that many people are not aware of is that lights on at night are interfering with moths, fireflies, and other insects, and really hurt their populations. And we want to preserve their habitat. Remove and control invasive plants. Now, fireflies are not like other insects where if you plant a certain plant, they will come to it, because they don't rely as much on specific plants, but on the habitat. And they prefer native grasses. Studies have found that areas with Phragmites, like this grass that's pictured here in the center, which is rather invasive and weedy, that where this exists, fewer fireflies will exist. Native grasses help provide the type of habitat that they need. In general, they need moisture as well. They're usually found, the majority of them live along rivers and wetter areas, so they need moisture, which is also why leaving piles of leaves is beneficial, because piles of leaves retain moisture and provide hiding places for them. Okay. And turn off outdoor lights. Naturally, we feel we need lights for security. That's fine, but use motion lights and don't use bug zappers. Bug zappers, all kinds of studies have been done, and bug zappers kill very few mosquitoes. Most of what they kill are a lot of insects that are beneficial to us, including many moths. And then we get back to using native plants because they're the best at providing the food and the habitat that our insects need. Can everybody still hear me? Hello? I got a pop-up.
Yeah, I'm not sure what
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. So just wanted to make sure. Okay.
We're still good.
Woo. Okay, so again, our native plants have co-evolved with the insects, and they are what these insects can eat. It's not the plants from Europe and Asia that are going to help them. Another reason for native plants is that they don't require things like fertilizer and pesticides that harm our environment. If you remember, in 2019, we had a number of lakes that were closed due to algal blooms. And these occur when heavy rains wash phosphorus into the waters. That's found in fertilizers. And this increases all the problems that our waterways have. Native plants don't need fertilizers. If you go to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection website, it lists excessive fertilizers as a cause of these problems in our waterways, and it lists using native plants as a solution for avoiding this from happening. Okay. And some of you might be familiar because it's been in the news for some time about the insect apocalypse. The fact that we are losing a lot of our insects, particularly our bees, and that this poses a risk to all life on Earth because of their pollination, the pollination that they provide. For example, Whole Foods did put together these graphics on what the grocery store would look like without bees, because bees pollinate so much of what we eat. On the left, you have your produce choices with bees. On the right, you have your produce choices without bees. So you're okay if your favorite fruit is oranges and that's really all you want to eat. But if you would like a little bit more variety in your fruit and produce, we need to do something about conserving our bees. Okay. In addition to bees, there are many other pollinators, often specialized. And this is important because about a third of our food, everything from apples and avocados to vanilla, are pollinated by insects. Some are pollinated by insects other than bees. For example, flies, beetles, moths, butterflies, wasps, ants, birds, and bats, among others. Chocolate lovers, because I'm a chocolate lover. The chocolate or the cocoa bean, in order to be able to produce a cocoa bean, there is a very tiny fly called the cocoa midge fly. That is the only thing that can pollinate chocolate. So without that, we have no chocolate. And that type of relationship exists with some of the other plants as well. Okay, and gardeners can be part of the solution. They can join together to create habitat in their own gardens. And these habitat would provide food and shelter and would not use pesticides, which would harm life. And you can do this by planting food plants and nectar plants, by providing shelter, such as nesting sites and overwintering sites, and by not using chemicals and looking for plants that are neonic free. Neonics are systemic chemical that is used in plants. It's not something that's added, it's actually something that's in the soil and in the system of plants, which kill insects that feed on them in order to preserve the plant. People that the companies that create these plants naturally can't sell them if the plants have been chewed. So some of them use this chemical in them in order to make sure that the plants are not chewed. And if you plant it, they will come. Small areas can feed pollinators. Health strips can feed pollinators. You just have to be mindful if you're planting, a sidewalk area, of not putting in very tall plants, of where people are going to park, how people are going to walk, where they're going to cross the street. But health strips are a fine place to put low-growing pollinator plants. And the great thing about helping insects is that, unlike with large animals that are going to need large areas to survive, insects will flourish in smaller spaces and urban areas. If anybody has visited New York City's High Line, here you have the very urban environment, New York City, and if you go by the High Line, you're going to see a lot of pollinators there. They come to the plants. They will find the plants. And it's not like if you wanted to save a zebra or something like that, where you need huge tracts of land. Small areas of land will do it. And we have to remember to allow leaf damage. 10% of leaves being eaten aren't even noticed. And give nature a chance to come in and take care of whatever insect pests might be damaging your garden. Insect predators will eventually come in. And if something is really causing a lot of damage, you can try hand picking, getting rid of that. And if absolutely necessary, use organic chemicals only for spot treatments, not just spraying, liberally all over the garden. Just use it where you need them. And an example that I have is let me just check one thing. Okay. I have a coral honeysuckle vine, the red vine that you saw earlier. And sometimes in the spring, it ends up with a lot of aphids on it. Well, it's going to look unattractive for a while, but eventually enough of the lady beetle larva, which is the insect that you're seeing here on the right, don't get rid of these. These are actually, they're carnivorous. It's the larva of the lady beetle that we are so familiar with. And these will eat aphids and other insects that are causing problems in your garden. So by having an ecosystem, a balanced ecosystem, you're going to lose some leaves, you're going to see some damage, but eventually a predator is going to step in to keep it under control. What they need is time. So ecosystems need time in order to balance themselves out. And in regards to design, basically we need to reduce the lawn. Lawns are the single largest irrigated crop in the country. So not only do they really not provide nectar or pollen or hiding places for a lot of the insects that we want, but they're also using a lot of our resources by using water, by using the chemicals needed to keep them in top shape. There are 40 million acres of lawn in the United States. The best way to start creating better habitat is to remove sections of lawn. Just keep it, just have a lawn in the places where you need a high traffic area. Other areas can go to trees or shrubs or perennial gardens. And something like this is mountain mint. Just take a look at the amount of pollinators on this. So mountain mint is just going to be one example of a plant that is creating excellent food for pollinators out there, as opposed to a lawn that isn't really feeding anything. And regarding design, garden in layers. You want to have high grown, you want to have tall plants like trees. You want to have a middle layer of shrubs and taller growing perennials. And then you want to have low growing plants along the ground. This helps provide places where birds can hide as well, where birds can nest, because you have a garden that has not only food, but also hiding places. And many fruits and vegetables need pollination. Therefore, growing things like tomatoes or eggplants or cucumbers, that also helps pollinators, because these are all foods that also provide for our pollinators. And let's go to butterflies and supporting Lepidoptera. So Lepidoptera are the order of insects that includes butterflies, moths, and skippers. So butterflies we're all familiar with, which is, on your left, they're usually the larger ones, with the colorful wings. But skippers are also part of Lepidoptera. They just have a slightly different look to them. And then moths, most of us are familiar with the night flying moths, but there are also day flying moths, such as the clear wing moth that we spoke about earlier. And for our Lepidoptera, we need to provide nectar and pollen sources. And these are used not just by butterflies, but also by beneficial insects such as bees, lady beetles, parasitic wasps. There are also flies that are helpful in the garden. Don't think of it as the house flies, but flies that are beneficial in our gardens. And some of the plants that are helpful in your garden are things like echinacea or purple coneflower. These provide food for pollinators, and they provide seed for birds. And with these, you want to stick to the pink varieties and the ones with single petals like this. With a lot of flowers, many have been bred to have very fancy petals. The problems with those sometimes is that reduces or sometimes completely eliminates the pollen and nectar that they produce. So where you can, try to stick to a species plant rather than to, something that can be grown exactly as it is from seed, rather than a cultivar, because although some cultivars also are good and produce pollen and nectar, others are not. And unless you really study up on them, it's hard to tell which way, whether they will be beneficial or not. So you want to stick with the single petaled varieties of a plant like purple coneflower, and not with the many fancy ones that are out there. Joe pie is another very beneficial plant that you'll find a lot of bees and butterflies flying around. And those come in smaller varieties as well as taller ones. So you have some diversity there and different options for your garden. And perennial sunflowers, which are Helianthus species, which depending on the species can grow 3 to 8 foot tall. So again, depending on what your needs are, you can look for different varieties to help bees and other insects in your garden. And hyssop or anise hyssop has these lovely lavender flowers. Wonderful plant. It reseeds very easily, so you can grow it from seed, and it'll bloom its first year. Very fragrant. Has the anise scent to it. It's deer resistant, so for those of you with deer problems, this is a plant that you can use as well. And it can also be used for cooking purposes. You can find recipes, to use it online. So a lot of things going for it, and just a wonderful plant. And one of my favorite reasons to grow this plant is that the goldfinches love the seeds. July and August, I get goldfinches in my garden almost every day as they pick away at the seeds of the anise hyssop. It's just an amazing sight. Monarda, and there are a number of different species of Monarda as well. On the left, you have scarlet bee balm. On the bottom, you have spotted bee balm. So the genus Monarda offers you a number of options, both in terms of height and color, and very useful, not especially the red one, not only for insects, but hummingbirds love the red one, which is the scarlet bee balm. Phlox, another lovely plant in the garden that attracts pollinators. And when I opened up with the yellow butterflies, with the all the yellow butterflies, that was phlox that they were using. So a plant that also looks lovely in the garden and blooms for a long time. And sundrops, or evening primrose, that it supports 16 different Lepidoptera, and the seeds are also beneficial for birds. And summer sweet, which is very fragrant. When this is in bloom, the minute that you walk near it, you know that it's in bloom. You don't really have to come close and put your nose in it to know. It will provide a lot of scent in an area, and it attracts many different pollinators. So don't be afraid of all the pollinators that it will have on it. This grows in full sun. It also does very well in shady areas and in average to wet soils. So if you have a wet area, it'll grow there as well. It's pretty adaptable to different conditions. And this is white vervain. Sometimes there are native plants that turn up in our gardens, and they're not plants generally that you buy at the garden center or that you would plant on your own. But this has very tiny white flowers. Usually, it's a plant you wouldn't even notice, but look at all the tiny flies that use it. It's a very beneficial plant for a lot of our tiny flies that are beneficial and take care of some of the pests in our gardens. So if it turns up in your garden, sometimes, if something turns up in your garden, it's occasionally a native plant and not just a weed, and it offers benefits. So just get to know things, and if something a little unusual turns up or you're not familiar with it as one of your normal weeds, give it a chance to grow and see what it might turn into. And for butterfly gardens, you often hear of the recommendation of butterfly bush, and butterfly bush does attract butterflies. However, the problem is that it recedes heavily, particularly in dry, rocky areas. And some states are banning its sale because it becomes invasive and becomes a problem. Butterfly bush is not native, and sometimes along roadsides in rather dry areas, it is escaping and becoming an invasive pest. So be careful of using butterfly bush. There are other plants, particularly, during the middle of the summer, there are other plants that will also feed butterflies that are native and will not become invasive to surrounding areas. And again, host plants, right? Let's feed the caterpillars. Milkweed is one that the majority of people are familiar with. And this is swamp milkweed with the pink flowers, and which is an attractive plant on its own. And you'll get to witness the entire monarch life cycle by planting milkweeds. But here's another one, Pearly Everlasting. Pearly Everlasting is the white plant. It's not that easy to find, and it's the host plant for the American lady butterfly. You'll get these tiny white flowers. Pretty much it will look, you'll see flowers on it from July until frost. And it's used by people who work with dried flower arrangements as well, because it dries well, which is why it will look good over such a long period of time in terms of having blooms on it, because the blooms kind of dry and stay on the plant. So from July on, you're going to have a blooming plant, and you're going to have a plant that will feed these caterpillars, which result in the American lady butterfly. This is what it looks like as an adult. So just a lovely, it's smaller, a lot of people see the orange and brown and are thinking monarch, but the size is smaller than a monarch butterfly. And a common and relatively easy plant that you can have and help out our butterflies is the black or the black swallowtail butterfly, and that's parsley. Their caterpillars feed on the leaves of parsley. And if you look at, this is a number of very tiny caterpillars. If you're looking at the right, you can see the 5 of them have been circled. So to give you an idea of what caterpillars are going to look like when they're very tiny, they will grow up. Caterpillars will shed their skin, and at different points in their life, they're going to look different. So this is a black swallowtail, the very youngest stage. And then they grow. These are the same, these are still black swallowtail caterpillars, as you can see now. This one will have a more yellow and green color to it. Others are going to be a little more orangey, depending on what phase they are in and how much they're growing. But you're going to need a lot of parsley for this. If you end up with a lot of eggs laid on it, you will need a lot of parsley. They will devour it. And another plant that these black swallowtails eat as caterpillars is also fennel. They also eat dill. So they're all related plants that are used by the black swallowtail butterfly. And there's a very similar butterfly called the spicebush swallowtail, which uses the spicebush, which is a shrub, or sassafras, which is a tree. So these are the 2 butterflies look similar, but have different host plants. And spicebush is a shrub that you can use in your garden, and it grows. It's fairly adaptable. Also, can do well in spots that are a little bit wetter, and has nice yellow fall color, as you see here. And here we have blue wild indigo, or Baptisia, which is the perennial, what was the perennial plant of the year in 2010. Lovely blue flower, stays in bloom for about 3 weeks in the spring, and it hosts the wild indigo dusky wing that you see here in the center, which is this butterfly with brownish and black colors, or it's actually a skipper. And it's a very interesting plant. If you're familiar with it, the seed pods, it'll have these rather large seed pods that rattle. And in fact, they used to be used as toys for children many, many years ago because of their rattling noise. And then coral honeysuckle, a wonderful vine, the host plant for the clearwing moth and the spring azure butterfly. And it also attracts hummingbirds. During the month of May, it is completely covered in red blooms like this. And it will continue to produce flowers really until frost, although not as heavily as it does in May. One great thing about coral honeysuckle is that it is, vines can sometimes be very destructive and need really strong supports. But one thing about coral honeysuckle is that it is a little bit easier in terms of maintenance and in terms of not damaging its support. For example, a similar vine, trumpet vine, that also has these trumpet-like flowers, that can get really out of hand. It is native, but can get out of hand and reseeds very heavily. So you end up having to pull up shoots that turn up all kinds of places in your garden. So coral honeysuckle does not produce the problems that other vines like trumpet vine do. And then our native grasses, which are so important. Little bluestem is a good one because it doesn't get too tall. Some of our other grasses, they might become 5-6 feet tall and get very wide. Little bluestem is easier to work with, and it feeds the caterpillars of 9 different skippers, as well as provide ground nesting site for birds, provides a hiding place for fireflies. And it's an attractive grass with bluish leaves, which then takes on these 20 seed heads in the fall. And again, one that's easy to grow and more manageable than some of the others. And when designing, another important thing that you need to do is to plan for blooming flowers from spring through fall, right? July and August and June, they're pretty easy to find plants that bloom June, July, August and provide food for our wildlife then. But there are a lot of insects looking for food earlier. So things like our native willows are a good, something good that you can have early in the season for those warm days that when they first start warming up. And on the right, you have wild black cherry, which most people actually consider a weed tree. They produce these very tiny, dark purplish black fruits, which the majority of people consider them as making a mess and don't like them. But they're a very valuable source of early spring blooms for our pollinators. And also the fruits are valued by birds. So if you have wild black cherry, consider leaving it somewhere because it's providing an excellent ecological benefit to your garden. And then when we get to September, again, the choices are not as numerous once we get to September. So plants like asters and goldenrods are very important at this time of the year, September into October. There are huge number of asters. Some of them, like white wood aster, will bloom in shady areas. And on the right here, you have reef goldenrod. There are many, many different kinds of goldenrod. On the right, you have reef goldenrod, which is a very well-behaved one, really doesn't spread much at all. Stays in bloom for a long time, late in the season, looks attractive. So, if you're concerned because maybe you've had goldenrod, you probably had Canada goldenrod, which does spread quite a bit, but is relatively easy to pull up. So you may want to do some research on your goldenrods to find a good one for your garden. And also, trees and shrubs are very important. A lot of times when we think of plants for pollinators, we tend to focus on perennials. But perennials don't have the mass that trees and shrubs do. And an example is like this oak leaf hydrangea. This, when it blooms, is just full of blooms, and it takes up a large amount of space, which is feeding a large amount of bees and other insects. So don't forget, when you think pollinators, trees and shrubs are actually, in many cases, more significant than perennials are. And in terms of native trees and insects, according to research done by Doug Tallamy, here's an example of how valuable certain plants are. So again, I mentioned earlier that oaks are the most important because they feed the largest number of Lepidoptera. Red maples are important as well. Pines, beech trees, viburnums, which are shrubs, feed 12 different types of Lepidoptera. So, and again, this is research done by Doug Tallamy. And we're going to finish up with birds and what they need. 96% of birds rear their young on insects. Okay, a chickadee, a little tiny chickadee like this, needs 350 to 570 caterpillars every day to feed its babies. Some birds, including some woodpeckers, make over 4,000 trips a day to feed their young. So think of native plants as bird feeders, because they are helping to produce the caterpillars that birds eat. Another thing we have to be aware of is invasive plants, plants that are from other places in the world, that have just gone wild in our local woods and taken over. And the problem is that they are not used by our native birds, by our native insects, and they outcompete our native plants. So not only do they not provide food for the animals that need them, but they take over and do not allow our native plants to thrive. So native plants destroy the lives of insects and birds. Excuse me. Invasive plants destroy the lives of insects and birds that rely on native plants. Science magazine reports a loss of 3 billion birds, or 29% of North American birds, since 1970. So it's a huge loss, and anything we can do to help our birds will really be very helpful. Okay, and birds need a water source. You don't need to have water for pollinators, but birds do need some type of water source, especially in the winter. Even if you can, go, because unfortunately in the winter, if you put out water, if it's very cold, it'll freeze. So even if you can get out there, as best as you can, and just put out some type of container with water for our birds, it'll go a long way. And looking at trees and shrubs that produce berries and seed for birds. Early spring blooming, you have serviceberry, flowering dogwood. You also have eastern red cedar, which is a very common evergreen, but that produces berries that the birds enjoy. And then you have nannyberry or arrowwood, which falls under the viburnums. And American holly, just a wonderful plant with its red berries that are so popular at Christmas time. And winterberry, which is also related, same genus as American holly. And the wild black cherry that I mentioned earlier, which most people consider a weed tree, but is actually a valuable native tree. And elderberry, which are which is a shrub that can grow fairly tall as well, are all plants that help feed our birds. And for some valuable resources, okay, the National Wildlife Federation, if you go to its website, has a feature that's called Native Plant Finder. And you can put in your zip code. It will give you native plants for your region based on zip code. And the great thing about it is that not only does it give you the native plants, but if you go to the specific plant, here's an example of what a page might look like for goldenrod. It tells you about the plant, but it also tells you what insects, or specifically butterflies and moths, would use it in your area. So you can also get, help with identifying some of the caterpillars and moths you might see in your garden based on the plants that you have. So that's an excellent resource. Again, that was, and I'll put the side back, that's nwf.org, which is National Wildlife Federation, and Native Plant Finder. Other excellent resources are the Native Plant Society of New Jersey, which has all kinds of information on plants that are native to our state, and offers programs, offers, they have local chapters pretty much for every county in the state. Mount Cuba Center in Delaware, a place that you can visit. It's a place that's dedicated to growing native plants, but has an excellent website with all kinds of information. And Mount Cuba Center has a trial garden where they will grow out and test different varieties of specific plants. For example, purple coneflower that I mentioned earlier. They have done, they have a report on something like 20 or 30 different types of purple coneflowers, echinacea, that they've grown. They tested it, I believe, I forget whether it's 3 years or 5 years. And they'll rate them on how disease resistant they are, how valuable they are to pollinators, which ones attract more pollinators than others. So it's an excellent resource. They've done trials on many different plants from, in addition to purple coneflower, I know they've done a Coreopsis, Baptisia, they've done some on grasses. I know that they were working on one on hydrangeas. I don't know if they have finished that one yet or if that one has been published, but they will test these plants out first. I forget whether it's 3 to 5 years, and then produce a report on their findings. There's also the Native Plant Trust out of Massachusetts. That's another excellent organization and has another excellent website on native plants. And the Xerces Society, which is promoted, which is dedicated to conserving insects, has all kinds of valuable information as well. So those are some excellent sources for you. And by following all these steps, instead of having plants that are the equivalent of the plastic or silk flowers, your garden will also be providing not only beautiful flowers and plants and an oasis for you, but it will also be providing the buzz, the chirps, and the flashes. And does anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And yes, anybody with any questions? I know I have a couple, but I would love to hear if anybody else has any questions or comments first as we go along.
And of course, Native Plant Channel on YouTube. My own Native Plant Channel. You'll find many different topics.
Hi, this is Margaret Flannery, if you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, when can you plant? Can you plant now?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, the fall is a good time to plant. Because
I'm sorry, Margaret, I just muted you because I think we're getting some feedback.
okay. The fall is a good time to plant because it gives the plants time to establish their roots, and they'll be in a better position to start growing in the spring. Also, we get more rain during this time of the year, and you won't have to worry as much about having to water them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And when you're thinking of planting, are you thinking of seeds or actual like plugs or actual grown plants, or what stage? Oh, sorry. Was I muted then?
No, I thought the question was for Margaret.
Oh,
I'm not sure. Yes, because seeds, native plant seeds, you can put them out now as well and just let them do their thing and nature take over. And those that will grow in the spring just won't start growing until then. But I assume that the question referred to actual plants as well, whether it was perennials or plugs or even trees and shrubs. Any of those, it's a good time to plant any of them.
I do have another question. This is Margaret again. I had actually milkweed, I believe it's swamp milkweed in my front, which for a few years it did really well. This year was absolutely horrible, and the rabbits started eating the leaves at the bottom. How can I get swamp milk seeds, like the seeds themselves, and replant them in the same area?
Yes. There's something available for sale. Yes.
And where is the best place to purchase these the seeds in this area? I'm in Bergen and Ridgewood, actually.
Well, online there are a number of sources. For example, Toad Shade is a native plant nursery. I believe they should have them available. Prairie Moon is another native plant nursery that's online that you can buy seeds from. As far as seeds of native plants, try the New Jersey Native Plant Society. They'll have it. They don't really sell things, they're not a real retailer, but they do have events where members can exchange seed. So I would recommend that.
And then my most important question is, can we have you come and do a survey of our garden of what best to plant as a paid service?
how How about we can get into that
Yeah.
later, but we'll get past our other questions because I know it's really, sometimes it's like you tried so many things on your own and you just need a professional to just to cut through and save you a few years on watching things grow and die or not thrive. And Margaret, I was smiling to myself thinking about the milkweed and rabbits because I kind of want to get an infrared camera in my backyard to see exactly who is eating all these things, because it's like it's just stripped from the bottom and there are leaves up at the top.
That could also be ground.
Yes. Well, I can tell you, we have 2 Ring cameras in the back, and they're basically at ground level. And we have a lot of fun watching the animals that come through. We have an albino skunk at night. We have 2 raccoons. We have deer, and we have an enclosed yard. It is totally amazing. The Ring cameras are a lot of fun if you put them at ground level in the back. Totally. And we had actually the bear that was roaming around in Ridgewood came in our backyard
Really?
this summer. Yes, in June.
That might be a little bit too much nature for some people. Does anybody else have any other? I have a couple. Well, if you'd like, just speak up or put it in the Q&A or in the chat, whatever you prefer. But I was wondering about the parasitic wasps, parasitic wasps. Like I thought they weren't such a good thing, but they are.
They are, if they're getting rid of pests, and it's just, we have to just think in terms of like a balanced ecosystem, and that too much of one thing is not good. So by just keeping it in balance, they all the insects that are there can take care of each other. But yes, there are parasitic wasps that will get rid of other things. And I mentioned the example in my garden, the problem with aphids, and then the lady beetle larvae, taking care of them. But yes, sometimes too many caterpillars is a problem as well, and can completely wipe out a plant. So we want to just provide diversity, so that there's a little bit of everything and they can keep each other's populations in check.
And in that picture of the coral honeysuckle, which just looks beautiful, there was another flower that looked like a tiny daisy. Was that like a different kind of plant, or was that an early stage of something?
Good question. Let me take a look. Let me just take a look at the presentation and see what was in there. Oh, I think a white one. Let me. It's that would be feverfew. Let me just pull that one up just to make sure that. Is this one you're referring to? On the left?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because I can see the leaves on it now.
Yes, this one is. It's feverfew, which is an easy plant to grow from seed. Yes.
And I have never heard the term hell strip before, but I think I can imagine what it would be. I'm guessing that little strip between the sidewalk and the curb.
Correct. Yes, the strip between the sidewalk and the curb, which basically has to put up with a lot of traffic and a lot of and whatever else might come its way, dogs and everything else.
It's a great term for it. And I also wanted to mention that since you exposed me to Mount Cuba, that Mount Cuba Center. I wasn't even aware of it. I can't believe I didn't know about it until recently. It's really a fascinating resource and seems like such a beautiful place. They recently publicized some of the research you were talking about echinacea and about which ones that they're not all equal pollinators. And so I think they mentioned, like, they had one of those long-term studies, and I mean, they're obviously just not selling the things for not making, I mean, they're just doing this for everybody to, build a better garden. But it was pretty interesting because I was wondering that, like, what about these cappuccino coneflowers or something? Like, are they the same thing as?
Yes. Yeah, Mount Cuba, they just, I believe it was this spring or this summer, they just came out with a line of plants that they are selling, but they only have literally a handful of plants. But their research, is still, it's excellent. Their research, basically the plants that they're selling are plants that they've attached their name to based on their studies, what they've done there. And Native Plant Channel, this past May, actually, I visited there and filmed. So if you're interested in learning more about Mount Cuba, the Native Plant Channel YouTube channel has videos, 2 of them. One of them is specifically on the trial garden and some of the research that they have published. And I'm excited to see their hydrangea trials, because I know that, I'm pretty sure, I believe they said December is when they're going to come out with the results of that one. So I'm excited to see that one, because they're basically testing a number of native hydrangeas, and then they're going to report back from everything to, to their disease resistance, to how valuable they are to pollinators. Yeah.
Do we have any other thoughts or comments or questions? Well, you can find out more about Lourdes and how you can contact her to help you, or to find out more information from her YouTube channel too. She's on the Native Plant channel on YouTube, and you can also I think that the Native Plant channel also has a Facebook presence too.
Facebook also.
And if anybody would like to get in touch with Lourdes, I can also put you in touch with her. And we also, if you check out our the last presentation that Lourdes did for us back in March, we attached a list of plants and nurseries also. So that is on the YouTube video for that presentation. And I will try to make sure that I attach, or at least upload it together with this one. So they'll be grouped together in case anybody's looking for any other resources. But this is a nice some other great ideas for plants too. And I love the idea of combining them too, because I didn't think that, just there might be that these insects might need 2 different plants, like one for the caterpillar, one for the butterfly or moth.
Right, different at some point in their life cycle, there's something very specific that they need. And that everything works together. We can't take one item out and, without considering what it will do to the rest of the ecosystem.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I hope that you have a lovely evening and that your gardens are there harboring all this wonderful life all fall and winter long into the spring. And so we can get a few more insects and keep that cycle going. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Lourdes, so much. And
thank you. It's been a pleasure. Everybody have a great night.
thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.